Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today's topic is a conversation I have with quite a few leaders throughout our portfolio. It's some version of we've invested in a tool for our developers, it hasn't really been adopted. How do we set these folks up for success? How do we get it across our organization? Or we have pockets of success with AI and we're really seeing the return on it. And how might we extend that to more teams so that we can really see the value? And more recently, how do we incorporate agents? Over the past 9 to 12 months, this has been a core focus for our clients and for ourselves, developing that within our own organization, figuring out what changes and what holds when agents take on the bulk of the work in software delivery. For anyone who doesn't know Lean Techniques, we are a technology consultancy based here in Iowa. Our mission is to help organizations make technology a competitive advantage. And we do that by working alongside client teams on real work to build up the capabilities and skills needed to lead. You'll see here that we're also a Microsoft Solutions partner, GitHub partner, and an AWS Advanced Tier partner, enabling us to provide our customers with access to greater resources and capabilities as they work to deliver on that advantage. So as we go through today, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat and we'll address as we go at the end. With that, I'm excited to introduce two of my colleagues, Scott and Tim, who will take it from here. Scott Sauber is our Director of Engineering and Microsoft MVP. He advises clients large and small on technical strategy, architecture, and organization design. He works alongside teams every day to help them adopt Agentic-First approaches that improve how organizations deliver software. He is an international speaker, Microsoft MVP, as I mentioned, and author, Redgate Community Ambassador, and co-organizes both Iowa Code Camp and the Iowa.NET User Group. And Tim Gifford is one of our founding team members, our Chief Innovation Officer and partner. He works with engineering leaders on making this shift at the organizational level, helping leaders know how to measure whether it's actually working and then doing it safely, securely, and cost-effectively. He is a founder of TechFuse Des Moines, formerly known as Agile and DevOps Days Des Moines, which is combined here this year, speaks regularly at conferences across the nation, and has helped over 50 companies across the Midwest. Scott, I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Danielle. All right, so you might be sitting there wondering, like, okay, what are we going to talk about today? So we're first going to level set on, like, what does Agentic-First mean? What stays the same in this world? What changes? We're also going to talk about everybody's favorite topics, security, governance, and cost, as well as how do you know if it's working and how do you get started doing these things. So just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today. So I figure we should start with, like, what does Agentic-First mean exactly? Because I feel like agent is the latest kind of buzzword in the AI space. And if I had to summarize it, it would come down to this, where a chatbot responds, but an agent acts. So what do I mean by that? Well, I did use AI to help me generate this image, and I think it summarizes it pretty nicely. So traditionally, like with a chatbot like ChatGPT or Copilot in Ask Mode or any of those kinds of things, you used to say, like, as a developer, you say, hey, I'm having this problem. What's going on here? Give me some ideas. And the chatbot just gave you some ideas of what it thought was going wrong. Whereas an agent, you don't just say, hey, what's going wrong here? You say, hey, go fix it and go do the actual thing. So that might involve, like, changing code. It might involve, if you're trying to troubleshoot an error, it might involve pulling down your logs from whatever log system that you're using and analyzing those. And it's actually doing these things on behalf of you as the user. So I'd say that's the biggest difference between, like, a traditional chatbot versus an agent is actually acting. So you're kind of going from prompts to pull requests with an agent. And what I find is most organizations have AI tools, but few have really redesigned their process with agents in mind. I wanted to talk a quick case study that's it's not really SDLC related, but I think it's a cool story to share. And that comes from IKEA. So if any of you have ever gone to IKEA and purchased a piece of furniture that's 8,000 separate pieces that you have to put together over the course of a couple hours, that's who it is. It's IKEA. And IKEA built an AI tool to handle around half of their call volume. And so this was from an article just from a couple weeks ago, so it's super recent. And so when you hear that they built this tool that handles half their call volume, you might think to yourself, okay, they have 17,000 call center agents. So half of those call center agents are probably out of a job now, right? Like a lot of us have seen headlines about layoffs going on due to AI or people attributing that to AI and things like that. But IKEA took a little bit different approach. They decided to retrain those people into design consultants. Because what they found was when people called into the call center, people weren't just calling to say like, hey, is this couch in stock, or is this end table in stock, or any of those kinds of things. They ultimately, like, yes, that was maybe the initial question that they had, but it was part of a larger goal that they were trying to achieve, which was, hey, is this end table going to fit nicely and look good in my living room, or whatever the case is? Like, that's ultimately the goal that they were trying to get at the end of the day. So IKEA decided to pivot those 8,500 call center agents into design consultants, and now that is a 1.5 billion with a B revenue stream for IKEA, which I think is really cool. So the reason why I bring this up, even though this isn't quite, it's related to the software development lifecycle, but I think this is a really good example. One, it's super recent. It just came out a couple weeks ago, but this is a good example of pushing that human effort into higher value work, because now that AI can handle some of the mundane things, now you can be freed up to think about this higher value work, and in IKEA's case, generate a brand new revenue stream they didn't have before. And it's also a good example of redesigning a particular part of the business around AI and agents and those kinds of things. So I just want to bring that up because I think it's a good example of those two things. So how do we take that kind of thinking and apply it to our software development lifecycle? All right, so what kind of stays the same in a world of agents? Well, I want you to think about this for a second, is if you think about what made good teams out there prior to AI, was these things I've got listed here. And these aren't just my opinions, these aren't just LT's opinions, these are backed by evidence-based research from DORA, which is the DevOps Research Assessment group that interviews a bunch of different teams to identify what makes a high-performing team. So if you go to the site dora.dev and go to the capabilities section, you'll see a lot of these things. And I want you to think about like which ones of these are still relevant in an AI-dominated world. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Well, spoiler is every single one of them. So all of these are still important in an AI-dominated world, and I would argue are probably even more important in an AI-dominated world where a lot of these things help keep AI on the rails, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So ultimately, like a takeaway there is like the fundamentals don't change. So I think a lot of people they hear AI and they kind of overthink things, or they don't go back to like first principles and think about like some of these fundamentals. And ultimately, those fundamentals are still the same at the end of the day. We still want fast feedback, tight feedback loops with our users. We still want to make sure we didn't break the application, which the best way to do that currently is through automated tests, all of those kinds of things. But agents aren't perfect. So I just hit a situation a few months ago where we had an agent building an API endpoint, and the agent, we had the agent create the code. It also like had agents doing like a local code review. We had agents do like a code review in GitHub using GitHub Copilot's code review. And all of them missed something that a human ended up catching, which was the endpoint was wide open to the whole world. So there was no authentication around it whatsoever. So that data could have been exposed to the entire world. Now, luckily, that was caught during that code review before that got shipped out. But this is a good example of agents still aren't perfect. Like they're pretty darn good, but they still will make mistakes. And that's ultimately where you still need some humans in the loop in your process to catch some of these things. So I kind of liken agents to like really smart, ambitious juniors who love to copy paste code all over the place. It's just previously you used to go to Stack Overflow to copy and paste things. And now agents are kind of copy and pasting from different parts of your code base, Stack Overflow as well, all of those kinds of things. So how do we create systems that enable this behavior and allows you to get the most out of them? So if you've got an existing project, guess what? If you've got an existing project that has really bad coding patterns in it, AI will proliferate those coding patterns. It won't magically turn your code base into really good patterns. It will basically keep proliferating those bad patterns as you're adding new features. So what you need to do is, if you have that situation where your existing project just has bad patterns, you need to establish some good patterns, like add a new feature that has the good patterns that you want to establish in some sort of seam, and then tell those agents about those patterns in one of these files. So these files are basically a way to incorporate some of your standards and things like that into your agents. And you can kind of think about these files, so like an agents.markdown file, Copilot instructions, or Claude.markdown file, kind of like that, that entire file gets copy pasted before all of your prompts and before AI takes actions. So if you have, so you can say things like, hey, follow the patterns in these files, don't follow the patterns in these files. So that's a good use case for like an existing application. But guess what? Again, if we go back to this was a good idea to do this before AI. So like, let's say you had a new team member join the team, or an intern, or whatever the case is, and you said, hey, go add a new feature, make this change in this existing application. Well, if there wasn't good patterns, guess what? They were probably going to proliferate those bad patterns. So nothing really changes from that standpoint. So you need to do the same kinds of things when it comes to AI agents. And if you're on a Greenfield project, well, if you get started too quickly, where let's say you have a team of 6 developers and you throw, all of them are AI agent enabled, and you throw them at a project before you've established those patterns, then chaos kind of ensues and you kind of end up with a bunch of different patterns. So really what you want to do there is take a week or so for a couple people to establish those patterns and then bring in the rest of the team. But guess what? That was also a good idea pre-AI, because if you threw a team of 6 people at a new code base, without some patterns established, again, people are going to kind of do their own things. It's just exacerbated now because you can move a lot faster with these AI agents. So again, the fundamentals don't change behind these things. So a theme that you've probably noticed is what's good for agents is usually good for humans as well. So something we've developed, because as we go around to different teams across different clients, is we kind of end up checking the exact same things over and over and over again. So as part of that, we developed this tool called the Agent Ready Assessment that basically will take in your code base and analyze it and check it for a few different things to make sure that it is agent ready. And spoiler, about 90% of these things that we end up checking were good ideas before AI, but there are some AI specific things in here as well. So you'll end up with this like punch list of to-dos to address. And then you also get like a list of like, hey, here are the things you're already doing well and things like that. So you notice the first 3 of those things were good ideas pre-AI. It's just those also help keep AI on the rails. And that 4th one is something AI specific as well. So this is something that we just noticed doing the same things over and over again. So we just made a tool to help automate those things. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But ultimately, what I found is AI just amplifies problems that you already had. So for instance, if you were rubber stamping PRs before, where somebody made a change across 20 different files, and within 30 seconds of that pull request opening, somebody was just clicking the approve button, it's like, well, there's no way that person was actually reading all of those lines of code. So that was a problem pre-AI, and now as you can get like minimum 2x, if not 10x faster, that problem gets exacerbated. Same with one senior reviewing all the PRs. Like that was a problem before AI. It's just, again, if you're minimum 2x faster, now that problem gets exacerbated because, that senior has to do their own work. They have to go on vacation, all of those kinds of things. So again, what I find is like AI starts to amplify some of these problems that the teams already had. If you don't have confidence in your tests or your pipeline to keep humans on the rails, guess what? You probably don't have confidence to keep AI on the rails either. So again, that's just another problem that existed before. It's just amplified. Or if you're relying on humans to catch things that computers can already catch, such as formatters, linters, security scanners, all of those things, that was something you should have been doing before AI. But now as you're generating more pull requests, now that's putting more strain on your humans, and you need to alleviate that strain. If you can't run the app locally to verify that everything works, again, AI works really well when it can verify itself. So that is a problem with AI and pre. Or if you have unclear stories, agents can't really help you figure out what it is that you want. But again, that was a problem before AI too. So just want to kind of call those out because I know from talking to our customers, a lot of people are feeling some of this pain right now. And but really, these were kind of problems behind the scenes. It just gets amplified now that you can move at the speed that you can move at. And the other thing I want to mention is you still own the code, not these AI agents. So you can't blame Copilot or Claude or Codex for a bug going out. You were the one who clicked the approve button and the merge button or set up the workflow for them to operate in. And so ultimately, just like it was never really like, the intern's fault. If, you've may have seen some stories about like, oh, this intern had access to production and deleted the production database. It's like, well, that wasn't necessarily the intern's fault. That was the system's fault for giving the intern production access. Like that was a bad idea from the get-go. So, but you still own the code, not AI. So you can't blame AI for introducing a bug or whatever the case is. You still had an opportunity to make that change. All right, so we talked about what's the same, so we should probably talk a little bit about what's different as well. So the biggest difference is the speed and quality if you have some of these things in place. So we're seeing 2x to 10x speed improvements with agents while also maintaining or improving quality. And we'll talk about a case study a little bit later that goes into a little bit more detail around this, but that's obviously the biggest difference. If you've been using AI agents or your team is, you probably have seen this as well. Again, I'm talking more like Claude Code, Copilot CLI, Codex, Cursor, using some of those types of tools. But you'll only realize the speed differences if you build a harness around your agent. Because what I mean by this is like, yes, like if you take into account the full like SDLC of like, hey, you create the code, you validate it locally, then you have like somebody else, like a product person maybe, like review it and say like, hey, is this what you wanted? Well, if you're going back and forth with like, oh, there's this quality issue, it might actually not be speeding, like you might be speeding up the coding part, but you're moving too fast because you don't have some of these quality guardrails in place, and then that's causing longer cycle times because now you have to go back to the product owner has to kick it back to you and all of those kinds of things. So how do we optimize the whole SDLC, not just the coding part, and get the speed differences there? All right, so let's talk about some low-hanging fruit on for some developers. So these are things that you can start doing today. So this might be a spicy one with some people, and that's having 100% code coverage. So I've always been a big proponent of automated tests. I'm a big test-driven development guy too. But I never really liked enforcing code coverage because I felt like it was a little arbitrary and felt like something the team should be enforcing a little bit. But the problem is with agents is they are inherently kind of lazy and they want to basically make you happy as quickly as possible. And that means like if they're not forced to do something, they're probably going to take the shortcut route to do some of these things. So for instance, if you only enforce 90% code coverage, most likely when you're adding new features, it's not going to go in above and beyond that if it doesn't have to. And so really, now that tests are so fast to create with AI, really there's not really an excuse anymore that it slows you down or anything like that. So enforcing 100% code coverage I found has been very useful and prevents back and forth with the AI agent where it's like, hey, you forgot to add this test or this scenario or whatever the case is. And then it opens the door up for something called mutation testing, which basically allows you to test, are your tests actually testing what you think it is? So it might flip like a true to a false, or it might change like a string value that you have in your system and expect that a test breaks when it does those things. Because if it doesn't, that means you're not actually testing the behavior that you think you're testing. So, but you can't really do that unless you have 100% code coverage. So mutation testing is something that has been around for a while, but not a lot of teams have done it, but more and more teams that are AI enabled are starting to do this to make sure, again, keeping AI on the rails to make sure that it's doing the right things. You can still explicitly ignore anything you don't want to test, something that's hard, you can just slap an attribute on it or explicitly ignore it. So if there's something weird in your code base, you can still do this while still enforcing 100% code coverage. But you also need to introduce like a check script or verify script of some sort that's running your formatter, your linters, running tests, security scans, all of those kinds of things. And then you tell AI about that. So in your agents MD file, which is kind of the universal standard that everybody uses other than Claude Code, because they just don't respect the standard for some reason. But in your agents MD file, or in Claude Code's case, in your Claude MD file, you can say, hey, to verify when you get done, run this particular script, and if anything's broken, go ahead and fix it. And that's usually like the first line I put in my agentsmd file because it's arguably the most important thing that you can tell an agent to do. So this really gives agents a way to verify their work, which is probably the biggest productivity boost you can give agents, because if you can tell an agent exactly what it needs to do in order to consider it done and its work done, then agents can pretty much run autonomously for, hours on end if you want, until it passes that particular check. What I find is most features are done in an hour or less now. A lot of them even like 15, 20 minutes or less. But then you can also enforce that check script in CI. So even if AI like skips it, because I would say if you put something in your agents MD file, 98% of the time it's going to listen to it, but maybe 2% of the time it doesn't, then you can still have your CI pipeline enforce that stuff. So again, AI agents can like watch your PR, make sure that it passes, and if it doesn't, then like auto address some of these issues without you actually getting manually involved. The other thing you can do is you can actually connect your SDLC, like your entire SDLC to your agent. So I know a lot of people are using like Jira or some work item tool tracking like that. A lot of times you can just tell an agent, hey, go implement story ABC123 and let it kind of go to town. Now there's also different strategies there, but you don't have to like copy and paste the user story and the acceptance criteria and any mockups or anything like that. Basically, if you connect your agent to Jira, it'll just automatically pull that stuff in. But you can do the same things with like GitHub or Azure or AWS, depending on what cloud that you're on, to enable different parts of your workflows. So for instance, on the GitHub side, being able to watch a PR and hey, if it's failing, go ahead and auto fix anything until it passes, those kinds of things. You use AI to do code reviews. I find most teams are already doing that. Something also you can do is you can start with plan mode, which basically is a mode that you can kick these agents into that basically says, hey, don't actually write any code yet, generate a plan, and I want to review that plan before you actually do something. So you kind of think of it like an intern creating their checklist of things before they go and execute it that you want to review before the intern spends some time on that. There's also a skill called Grill Me. It's an open source skill that basically walks through any ambiguous questions that you might have. So if the story says, hey, place this button on the screen to do XYZ, it might ask you questions like, well, where at on the screen? What color should the button be? All of those kinds of things. So it'll kind of walk you through all of those questions. And it often comes up with questions that you wouldn't even think of yourself. If you aren't using AI skills, definitely something to look into or come talk to us about how you can use those to automate your workflows, because those are relatively new. They came out late last year. All the major AI tools are adopting those, but that's how you can really automate a lot of your workflows. In Copilot, there's a mode called Autopilot, and the same thing in Claude Code called Auto Mode. That's also a big productivity boost. And the creator of Claude Code, Boris Cherny, actually said this is the best feature in Claude Code. And this is basically a way for AI to evaluate, hey, is what I'm doing going to affect your system negatively? If so, I'm going to ask you for intervention. But if I'm just like reading the code base, I'm not going to pop up a message saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? I'm just going to kind of let it go. So this is a big productivity boost. But again, despite all of these things, you are all still responsible for the code AI generates, or your teams are responsible for the code AI generates. You can't just blame the tool for something that AI did. All right, so those were like a bunch of practical things that hopefully you can take back and start implementing immediately away from this webinar. But what you're going to find is very quickly, you're going to find your team. If you do these things, I would say within a week or two, if you're doing this right, you're going to run into this problem of we're out of stories. And I felt this personally as I've been helping teams adopt AI, where we ran out of stories a lot of times, like in the tens of times over the course of a couple months. And what I would say to that is I want to remind people that developers or engineers are at the forefront of AI compared to literally any other profession out there, construction, lawyers, anything else. Developers are at the forefront of AI. And when you look at a lot of the data, less than 1% of the global population actually pays for AI tools. So again, some of us who have been in this, you might feel like, oh, I'm falling behind, or, there's a lot of people, like a lot of other professions doing these things. The data says it's really not. So really developers are at the forefront of AI compared to any other profession, which means other professions have to catch up. And that includes on the product side of things and creating stories and things like that. But now, again, if we go back to the IKEA example, now we've got time to do things that we never had time to do before. So some ideas while you're waiting for kind of product to ramp up from that standpoint. There's different strategies there that I'll talk about too. Maybe you can tackle the tech debt that you always wanted to tackle. Or for instance, how many people have good up-to-date documentation out there? I'm guessing not a lot of people feel great about their documentation based on what I've seen in the market. Well, there's something called GitHub Agentic Workflows. So if you're in GitHub, you can do this today, which is basically on a pull request, you can analyze your documentation and identify any gaps from what you are introducing in the code in that pull request. So you can have AI basically leave a comment saying, hey, your documentation doesn't match what this code is doing. You need to go update the documentation as well. So again, these are things that I found a lot of teams put by the wayside, but now they've actually got time to do some of these things. You can also do things like analyze prior PR comments to see if you can automate those in some sort of check, like both what AI is saying and what humans are saying. Go back through and automate some of those workflows. Can you have AI go analyze your error logs? Because ideally you want your error logs to get to 0 where nobody's having errors. But I find a lot of teams might not have the time to always go back and look through the errors on a consistent basis. So maybe you can do some of that. Or do you have dashboards measuring your product impact? Just all of those kinds of things. So like if you're feeling this like, hey, I'm out of stories, I really like the bigger thing here is like, can you take a step back and say like, okay, given extra time, what is it that you really want to do? Like what is a pain point in your system? And have you actually applied AI to other parts of your system, like the documentation, optimizing your code review process, optimizing how your app is running in production, all of those kinds of things. And can you implement some of these things to apply to other parts of your SDLC, not just the coding part? But that leads me into, hey, can product owners use AI? And the answer is yes. So again, can you connect different parts of your product lifecycle to your agent? So can you connect Jira? Do you have like a support ticket queue? Do you have like AI recordings? Do you have company goals or OKRs that you are trying to follow, or analytics tools? And if you give AI and agents those different pieces of context, now you can do more interesting things. So you can have AI like summarize and cluster the different feedback from, support tickets, analytics tools, and all those kinds of things into different themes, and have that kind of influence your roadmap. Or maybe you want to compare like requests coming in against the original stated product goals or your company OKRs, because a lot of times it can be easy to be like heads down on a team and like just keep churning out features, but not realize like, oh, this feature doesn't actually fit into the original vision that we had for this product. So can you have AI involved in the loop to like basically review your stories before you bring them to the team to make sure that those things are aligned? Or, some other things is, and this is like honestly one of my biggest beefs with Scrum, is there's no like formal ceremony to look back like, hey, what did we do 2 months ago? And did that actually move the needles that we thought it moved? So can we do some of that stuff where, hey, we on a cadence, we look back at the previous sprint or previous quarter's deliverables and check, hey, are people actually using this stuff in production? Are they getting the value out of it that we expected? How many people are using this new electronic delivery system compared to the paper system that we were using, and what was the expected ROI of that? All of those kinds of things. Have help with prioritization, as well as like evaluate a story's readiness for refinement. before you bring it to the team and things like that. If you've got like a format you're trying to follow, how can we upfront do some of those questions before we bring it to the rest of the team? This was a fun one. If you have like a UX team that gives a mock-up, how does the mock-up compare to the story, and are there any inconsistencies there? And again, identify those before you bring it to the team as well. So those are kind of the things that you can do differently today. And literally everything I just listed is possible today. So as we look to the future and the rest of 2026, what is kind of coming next? And Boris Cherny, the guy who created Claude Code, who kind of created this whole agentic revolution, I would argue, which by the way, Claude Code has only been a tool for like since May of last year. So like in 13 months, basically when that tool got released, now a lot of different tools ended up copying what Claude Code did. And I think that's also a thing to point out of like in the last 13 months, things have completely changed. And so it's interesting to look at like what the next 13 months will bring. But if you look at like in 2024, we kind of asked questions. In 2025, we prompted to make changes. And in 2026, Boris thinks we create loops. So the idea behind that is if we have some sort of self-verifying loop, how do we go from idea to pull requests to review like what's been pre-vetted by AI within our delivery system that we've created with like those automated tests and things like that. So that's kind of where he sees things going, which I think makes a lot of sense to me. One thing to say about that is Boris also has an unlimited token budget, and not all of you on this call do. So sometimes doing these loop things can be expensive, while efficient can also be expensive. So sometimes you have to operate within the constraints of your system. And Tim will talk a little bit later about cost management, things like that. But you might hear people talk about loops. And I just want to qualify that like, hey, to do what Boris is doing requires an extensive token budget, not in like the tens of thousands range, but probably you need like some sort of near unlimited plan, or you're spending thousands of dollars a month on tokens. So it just kind of depends on the tool that you're using and whatnot. But I do think this like idea of how do we get AI agents to operate more autonomously within the guardrails we've provided is a theme for 2026. And honestly, is a lot of the foundation laying that we've been doing for the last decade plus with these automated tests and things like that. So with that, I'll throw it over to Tim.
So thanks, Scott. You got to cover all the cool stuff. Now I get to cover security, governance, and costs. And I'll jump right into the first cost that you just mentioned is this unlimited token budget. Most of us don't have that, but we believe that your tokens are likely the cheapest thing in your SDLC. So even though they are relatively expensive, the human labor costs are generally what's going to cost more money than those tokens. But there are some waste associated with your token spending. If you have to do rework for a less expensive model and you use it multiple times, that can actually result in a waste. So we tend to use the more expensive models because in our experience, they tend to get a better result on the first time, as opposed to having to rework what the other models had already done. We're also seeing a lot of companies, even ourselves, where there's a bunch of different AI tools and frameworks that are available. There are team members using different frameworks that have some of the plan implementation and verification phases built into those. Those, in my experience, tend to use more tokens than if you were just to use like Claude Code or a CLI on its own. And if you're using these loops, they can get out of control, especially if they're unattended and you don't have any visibility to them. So a couple different suggestions to manage those token costs. Of course, the first thing you should do, this is baked into all token providers, implement some level of budget, just like you do with your kids. Protect from them overspending at the org level or at the individual level. If you want more granularity, there are API token gateways available that you can look into. Now, they will give you the dashboards, they will give you the controls, they will give you the capability to do more granular reporting, but they do have a cost of a little bit of a latency because every request is going to go through them before it goes out to the token providers. All right, so we'll move on to security. I believe that security right now is the worst that it will ever be. Now, why am I saying that? And I think right now we are in the turmoil of an AI agent or a model that can discover vulnerabilities very quickly and very well. The Mythos model that was released in April, well, in limited release to certain people in April, has been shown to be very effective at finding vulnerabilities in open source code and other code bases. Anthropic did do Project Glasswing, which is inviting certain partners in to help fix those issues before they release the Mythos model more generally. Of course, Fabled release was released and then taken back due to some national security restrictions because Fable was effectively Mythos with some guardrails in place, but they were concerned that those guardrails could be overwritten or bypassed. And historically, a lot of these security issues have always been deprioritized. So regardless of the CISOs wanting those to be prioritized ahead of time, if they weren't critical or high, they ended up getting pushed down into a backlog and never got touched. Mythos is causing those to get surfaced to the top of those backlogs. We have heard of organizations pausing a lot of feature work right now in order to prepare for the Mythos release to come out. And the other thing that the security focus has put on the industry is they're starting to think about maybe those old database servers that have sat out, out in their racks that haven't been upgraded forever. They're end of life, they're out of support, they're not getting the critical patches from the vendors anymore. There's a focus on getting those upgraded. So we've got clients that are trying to get those things in a better spot before those security vulnerabilities become more widespread. But again, good news, based on what Scott's saying and what we're seeing with these new models and Agentic-First delivery, we're able to get those defects, those security issues fixed a lot faster than ever before. There's less of a trade-off that we need to take. So let's jump over some governance and accountability. Code reviews and PR reviews, as more of this code is being developed, there's more human in the loop for doing these reviews. Now, we don't necessarily need all of those reviews to be done by humans or as much. So one of the headwinds that we've seen to adoption is when you have some more junior members or other team members that are creating a bunch of code that then needs to be reviewed by a more senior and experienced team member. It makes the people that we really need creating champions through this transition become dissenters. And so how do we prevent those people from being dissenters? Well, we've got to make them so that they're doing more in their job than just reviewing slop that was created by AI code gens. And the way that we can do that, we can leverage all of these old tools that we used to do. We used to use these all the time and put these in those quality gates. So, Scott had mentioned linters. Let's put the linters in our CI/CD stream. We should have that 100% test coverage, putting in mutation tests so that we know that the code is good. Cyclomatic complexity, remember that, where it would check the complexity of the code and make sure that it passed certain levels before you would bring it in. We can put all these things in now so that those developers have some guardrails before they're pushing those PRs to have reviewed. The size of your files, the size of your module, the size of your diff. We want to keep these things as small as possible. And we also want to make sure that our architectural rules are in place. We don't want dependencies being spaghetti-like across all the different layers of our application. We can put checks in there to make sure that we are aligning to those architecture rules that we have in place. And then, of course, secret scanner. You need to have that in place so you're not publishing any of your API keys, any credentials out into your GitHub or your source code repository that then could be seen and compromised by others. Of course, there's a couple AI tools. You can have an AI do a score on the diff. Maybe it will make sure that it aligns to the rules that you have defined for your code base. And then, of course, you might want to have the AI tools maybe do a refactoring once in a while. I wouldn't suggest doing this all the time in your loop, but occasionally have it do a refactoring to make sure that it's cleaning up any of the code that maybe is out of compliance with what good looks like for your team. And then this is a quote from Dan Schipper, who's the CEO of Evergreen. He's like, I really align with this quote because I want people to stand behind every line of code that AI generates. I don't want you to share anything with anybody that you have not reviewed every line on your own. And you should have the professionalism and the responsibility to do that before you put that on any other person. So let's move on to governance. Again, we want to govern the agents kind of like we do with a human. And there are best practices that we've been following for decades now. So we want to treat these agents like employees that have system access. We want to give them least privilege, and we want to sandbox them. We used to talk more about ephemeral environments, standing up an environment for a specific pull request, have it do its thing, and then tear that environment down so that the scope of that is only within that environment. We want to have short-lived and scoped creds. We want to have allow lists for any tools or MCP servers that we're using. We've always wanted to have traceability between the idea that we have and the ticket that was created all the way out. The code changes go along all the way down to deployment. And I feel like now it's easier, and we have the capability to do that now because it's not so much human effort. We used to have humans go in and put in their commit code what the ticket was. We can get those commit messages a lot easier with the AI tools that we're using. And as we know, treat all input as hostile. We've got prompt injection, which is a new threat. Well, not a new threat vector, but with AI tools, I guess it is. And then supply chain attacks have been in the headlines recently. What's happening is these tools are going out and finding a credential and going and updating a library. And then the next time somebody runs or pulls down that library, it has an installation script associated with it, which then goes through your computer to find any other credentials that it can do. And then it will update a package, post that out, and put an installation script. So the next person who downloads it will then also go through that same insidious malware of capturing those credentials, publishing changes, and then they spread pretty quickly. So we need to be very careful about that. One of the ways we recommend is we want to automate your deployment, your dependency updates, but we want the libraries to cool down for 7 days or more. And what that means is you don't take any change that has happened within 7 days. You wait. This allows the library maintainers to make sure that any of those malicious segments of code have been cleaned up before we pull those down. You know, back in my day, it was expected that you would have explicit versions. When the node environment came around, things were moving so fast that they used wildcards to pick the latest, so you wouldn't actually know all the latest code. But there is a way to lock those files down. It locks your entire dependency trees. It knows exactly what version of those files that you're using. So we need to make sure that we're using the lock files, we're checking those lock files into your source control so that the next time somebody builds, they're building the exact versions that should be on those machines. And we're limiting, because of the cooldown, the opportunity for malicious code to get into our systems. And then if you'd like, I think these are going to become more in vogue, is putting some sort of artifactory repository in front of it. So you're not actually downloading these libraries directly from the public internet. You're going to be having your company, your organization responsible for those artifact repositories, and you're going to be pulling from those. So those will be curated and managed by your organization to make sure that those malicious libraries don't get into your code. And then, of course, we do need the humans. We keep those in the loop for irreversible actions, what Amazon would call one-way door decisions as opposed to two-way door decisions. These are things when you're doing a deployment, if you're going to delete something, or if you're going to spend some money, we want to make sure somebody is sitting there reviewing that. All right, and I think finally, the old is new again. Observability for governance and security and cost is really key. We need controls and tools for your team to observe, monitor, and alert on any risks that happen. We want the more controls that we have, the quicker that we can move. And so our job now as humans is to learn where the gaps are in those controls and build tools to fill those gaps. Dan Schipper again, these AI models are trained on what has been done in the past. We need us to see what needs to be done and where those gaps exists within our systems that we're building. All right, so how do we measure whether it's working? And I always think it's interesting because when we first talk to companies that are looking at measuring the AI adoption, the first thing they always measure is like AI adoption, like how many people are using the tool. They will go into how many people are using it daily average users versus weekly average users, and seeing how close they can get both of those numbers to be. But if you think about it, what measures do your business stakeholders actually care about? They don't care about AI adoption. They care about the impact that your features are having on their audience. Now, that's really hard to do. And so we might not lead with that measure. It's a little easier to get usage measures. So they're going to care if users are actually using the measure or the features that we've developed. Next, they're going to worry about speed. Hey, are we getting the things out? And then finally, they'll worry about quality, but you don't have to tell them quality because they're going to tell us if there's a quality problem. But again, here's what we typically report. We talk about AI usage. We do the stickiness thing if they're using the tools. Are the PRs AI assisted? What percentage of the code is done? Ultimately, we don't really care about those over time. There may be a good measure to start with to make sure that people are using them, but ultimately, if you're getting the results that you want, they're going to be these higher level metrics that are closer to what the business stakeholders are looking for. Scott already mentioned DORA. These are a good baseline measure for everything related to speed and quality. The other one that I really think is important is product health. I think product health is another quality guardrail and something that stakeholders really enjoy hearing about. So things that you can measure from the product health are things that you can do for product health. So every single day, you should go out and look at the user sessions of people who are using your tool. You should check on the error rates. Are they experiencing errors? And if so, hook up an agent and see what we can do to fix those things. And then a lot of these observability tools will have things like a frustration filter. And you can see user sessions where there's slow response times. You'll see if they're getting an error. You'll see if that specific user flow they are trying to achieve is successful or not. You'll see how many there are. And then my favorite one is called rage clicking. You'll see when they are just trying to get something done and they are not able to. This gives you a very good measure of the people who are using your tools and how they're doing. And you can share these stories with your stakeholders so that they understand that. Now, a little bit future looking is what I think of these other product measures. And it's something that I call precision product ops. And so we do, when we're in Iowa and there's something called precision agriculture. And this is where, as a farmer goes through the field, they're able to see every seed that goes into the ground and the yield that comes out from that seed very precisely. And they can vary the rate of the seed and the inputs based on the soil and other factors that are going to optimize yield. And so I think about the telemetry that they're doing. How do we build more telemetry into our product operations so that we can see how people are using those tools? And I think eventually what I want to see is, as we have more capacity, we've heard of A/B testing. I think we should be testing more variants than just two. So if you've got extra capacity from your software engineering now that they're using Agentic-First, can we do multiple tests within our audience to see which of the variants gets the best results and use that evidence to make product decisions? We're finally at a point where product people can become the CEO of the product. We've heard this term before, but we've never really given them the tools. I want to get to the point where you can create a profit and loss statement for every feature that's in your system. You get to determine the viability and the feasibility of these tools by actually having data associated with it. And I feel like we can put these things in place now that we have the capability with AI tools. And this is going to turn you into the investor of your product. You're going to be allocating the resources and capital to the product in order to get the biggest gains. And I think that's going to be a big change in how we think about product in the future. All right, so what kind of signals do we have if this Agentic-First thing is going well? The thing that's really interesting about measurements is I feel like they're become more in vogue when expectations aren't being met. And so when people were buying a bunch of licenses for these tools, and the people who are buying them and are not seeing the productivity gains that they expect, they start to ask a lot about how to measure success and how do we measure if these are working effectively. But what I found is there's some general feelings that come along with it. Is our delivery better? Does the product better? Are customers happier? Are the developers happier? Have those cynics that used to be the developers that didn't know how AI was going to work for them, have they become your biggest champions? And Scott mentioned this too, but like the first time an organization sees that a backlog is empty, it is all of a sudden they don't ask whether it's working or not. They know that that backlog has never been empty before. And now the product people are hustling to try to figure out what makes sense for the next thing to be built. And then finally, what we do, we generally start with a single team. If we get one team spin up, then they want another team and another team and another team. And so that's another signal that it's working, because they're actually trying to scale this across the organization. But hey, you probably still want some numbers. So we do have a case study of standing up a Lighthouse team using Agentic-First. It just blows me away of how effective these tools have been. We're getting most of, all of the code. Can we say all of it? Maybe we need 5 nines there, Scott. But 99% of the code is being AI generated. I think we're pretty conservative with a 2x throughput measure. The quality is 10x. The QAs were, the people that were reviewing the code were saying they were seeing 10x fewer defects that were coming through. Stories were being completed in about 15 minutes. And we have very good code coverage. It's still 2% off. I don't know what's going on that team. We need to get that one fixed up. And then we have to have 3x the number of stories that we used to have before. I can't remember what that specific number was. Was it like 15, and now they need 15 per sprint, and now they need 45 stories to be ready for the team. And then I really love this quote. This is from a critic who, after experiencing having this experience, they went to understanding the difference. And a lot of times you'll have these people that start off thinking they identify themselves as a coder, and they get to now think of themselves as a builder. And they've got these great tools that can help them get more done and build more things. So with that, I'll turn that over to Danielle.
Yeah, thank you both. That was quite the list of things the folks here on the call today can take with them and start applying. I'm sure there's a bit of overwhelm with the number of things that we were able to address, but I think what was able to really come through is there's a lot of ways to get started, right? And the way that we really find to at least kick off with new teams is doing this agent ready assessment, which really gives you an opportunity to take all those things that Scott and Tim have shared, get a quick snapshot of that, and then provide you with a punch list. So it feels a little bit more consumable to address team by team. And I think the other thing that we've really found to be successful, which Tim alluded to in terms of success in scaling across your organization and really embodying that agentic-first organization. So we start with one team and let that Lighthouse team really show the way, which allows others to see what is possible and then gravitate around that. It's what we've seen with much of the transformation that we've helped with over the last 15 years in business here. And this is, what maybe Scott was referring to. It's what stays the same, right? And just a different technology and tool that we're leveraging to help those organizations be successful. I was also really interested in your precision product ops. So really appreciate going beyond just what we would consider the SDLC to share about how either developers or others within the SDLC can create an advantage for the organization. These tools really give us an opportunity to extend ourselves in a way that we might not have thought possible at the individual and team level. I'm also going to encourage us to answer a few questions here. There are some folks that have already popped some into the Q&A and our chat, so we're going to address those. That might mean we run a little bit over for the call, so those are welcome to drop if they need to, and just want to extend a genuine thank you for your participation here today. We know there's a lot of other options out there for you to be listening to podcasts, webinars, and any other content, and we hope that this was a valuable session for you all. So with that, I'm going to pop over to the webinar chat. We've got our first question from Chris. Thank you so much. We started to address this a bit with extending again from the developer to the product organization and what we might be able to do as roles start to converge a bit. And Chris had asked, with this fundamental realization, how are organizations handling Agile? We have our SDLC plus AI managing issue generation and management as well, which further reduces the need for other roles. Scott, do you want to take a first cut at that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I definitely think the roles are changing. So like Boris, the creator of Cloud Code, has been talking a lot about like people are becoming more generalists. So I think that's both on the coding side of things. So I think if you're just a front end dev or back end dev or whatever the case is, I think you need to be more broader than that and kind of own multiple parts of the SDLC. But then the comment about, hey, we're having AI manage some of these other roles like a PO, BA, QA. Does that collapse some of those roles? I definitely think it can. I do think what I think the future is like smaller teams that can handle more and have a tight focus on what it is that they're trying to achieve. So some of the teams that I've been a part of, there have been comments made of they never felt more collaborative on a team than when the whole team was like AI enabled. Because if you're churning out features on average every 15, 20 minutes and you got 4 people on the team, that means you have something to show. You have, at least 4 things to show a product person an hour. So like you're showing them and constantly getting feedback and those kinds of things. So I do think that lends itself to how do we tighten those feedback loops and get more collaborative? Like, are we on calls more of the day? Or, if we're in person, can we co-locate to be more collaborative and things like that? And I think that tight collaboration is key because previously, developers used to squirrel away for a half day, a day, a week to ship a feature, and that's just not the case anymore. So how do we tighten those feedback loops? So I do think people can start to absorb more and more of those roles and then frees up organizations to tackle more things that they never even thought that they had time to tackle. Like a lot of huge enterprises, for instance, have piles of tech debt that they could have never gotten to before. Now this opens up that conversation. Or maybe you buy a lot of things off the shelf, but we all know one of the challenges with buying something off the shelf is it might do 80% of what you want, but then you kind of shoehorn in your custom process you weren't willing to change. And now you kind of customize this off the shelf tool. And now you kind of have almost the worst of build and buy where you've customized things. So maybe that lends itself to just building it. If you can build it, let's just say 10x as fast as before. Now, maybe now that gets you exactly what you want. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on that question.
Tim, anything you would add there? All right, so I'll go to the next question.
I think there's going to be a proliferation of new apps. I kind of equate this to when Excel came out, and now you gave this capability that accountants only had before. And now you're letting them do if then, case and they're letting them do scenario cases based on their spreadsheets. I think those spreadsheets could potentially become apps. So we're giving this new capability that allows much more to happen. My hope is that we start focusing more on the things that we're building and making sure that they get adoption and moving up, like thinking harder about the human interaction with the systems that we're creating, as opposed to just creating more and more and trying to just be a feature factory.
Great. The next question I have up front here is from Brian. Have you heard of anyone having success in using AI to automate front-end web interface testing with legacy systems that don't have a defined API backend and are traditionally hard to test?
Short answer is yes. So you can use AI to, a lot of times with these AI tools, if let's say you don't tell it to write tests, a lot of times it will automatically throw in its verification like, hey, when I'm done, I'm going to open the app and click around and make sure it does the things that I expect. So these AI tools will, like by default, kind of do that stuff if you're using good ones and good models. But then also you can obviously use these AI tools to generate some of those more end-to-end style tests. So if you have a more legacy system where you kind of just need to take in the inputs and then check the outputs, like maybe you log into a system, you click around, you place an order, you check out, place an order, and then at the end of the day, it should end up in this database at the end of the day. You can do more of that black box style testing where you're just kind of taking in the inputs. You don't really care how it gets to where the destination is. You just care, did it get to its final destination? Which, by the way, was the way that a book that's been out for, 20 plus years, working effectively with legacy code, told you how to work effectively with legacy code was create these characterization tests. Because if you characterize your system through tests of like, hey, given these inputs, I get these outputs, or I do these things that the data ends up here. Now you can change the things in the middle once you have the safety net in place, and that allows you to do that. So again, it kind of goes back to the fundamentals.
I think
On some of those
one of those
things.
fundamentals too is like, can that legacy system run locally? Because that AI agent needs a place to do it. Otherwise, you've got to move it down to a CI stream, and it just increases the feedback loop, so it can be a little more painful. The other thing that I saw was record playback is coming. Was that in Codex or was that in Claude that came through?
Codex, yeah.
So Codex is changing the model a little bit by embedding the browser inside of their tool. And so they're allowing it to capture, record, and playback a little bit better from a web browser. So I'm interested to see kind of how that develops as more foundational models can take that on.
We got a comment in here about playwright MCP goes a long way to the UI testing with Axe for accessibility. Chris, thanks for that comment there and adding to that question. Appreciate the community we're all giving back to here. I've got another question. I've got 3 more actually, and we're going to get to all of them. Really appreciate those that have been willing to ask the tough questions. What tools and platforms are you using for agent orchestration across engineering orgs?
Yeah, I mean that I hit on some of them of like Claude, Copilot, Codex, some of those kinds of things in terms of like orchestrating multiple agents. So what I'm finding is some of the better or like some of the more advanced AI users are starting to spin up 3 to 5 sessions at once. So they might be working on 3 to 5 stories at once, for instance, or maybe they have one that's running some sort of cron type stuff. So a lot of these tools have different ways to manage different agents and kind of the different sessions and what they're doing. And so from like an individual level, you can kind of keep track of what it is that you're doing. You can technically hand off those sessions to other users, but I don't really find in practice that makes a ton of sense because it gets done so quick a lot of times that you can just let it run yourself. But you can definitely run it across different form factors. So for instance, again, I keep going to Boris, the creator of Cloud Code. He says most of his work is done from his phone anymore. So he gets, sent screenshots on his phone and he directs the code the code or gives the feedback that way. And the agents kind of keep running. So he's actually using like the Claude app to orchestrate some of those things. GitHub recently released the GitHub app that allows you to orchestrate those things too. And that's been really good as well. So it just kind of depends on the platform that your organization has already enabled and then kind of leveraging those. But pretty much all of them have some way of managing multiple agents at once.
Mm-hmm.
I've got another question here. Can you share any more insights on how you're seeing large orgs with pockets of maturity around these guardrails, like in Scott's checklist and the governance and quality tactics Tim shared, scale these practices across their engineering orgs? What are the main factors that drive that success?
Yeah, honestly, a big reason why we created the agent ready assessment, it wasn't just for like, obviously, when we're checking the same stuff, it makes a lot of sense from us, but I find you got to gamify it a little bit because when people see that they're getting an F in their code base, they don't like that. And so they like seeing the number go up and to the right. And so they like seeing, hey, I was at an F and now I'm getting an A. And oh, by the way, I've noticed like AI staying on the rails and I'm getting better results and all of those kinds of things. So like, how can you gamify some of those things in a good way? Because like Facebook released, or Meta now, I guess, release used to have like a token leaderboard of who's using the most tokens. Well, that encouraged some behavior, as you might guess, that people just had things running in loops just to boost their token numbers, which is probably not the value that you want. So like gamifying the right things, because like in that assessment, we're trying to gamify the right things and things that will actually help you, not just like, hey, are you using tokens or not? But I think like, yeah, scaling across the org too. How do you get people excited about it? And I find when I pair with people who aren't really using agents, within the first, I mean, I've had people who like within the first 2 minutes are like, oh my goodness, this is like way better than what I was doing previously. And like they see the value pretty immediately. So I find it's just the same old adage of like, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? And how do you change a company culture one conversation at a time? So like, how do you create those learnings and things like that and show people kind of the way? Obviously, you can do things like lunch and learns or creating like Teams channels dedicated to this stuff. Like we've got one internally called Agentic Coding that literally gets daily traffic where people are posting stuff. But it didn't start out that way. Just people naturally have started getting more and more excited. And now we literally have daily traffic where people are posting multiple articles a day and things like that. So you got to do some of these grassroots, you kind of have to do a combination of like grassroots, like show people the way, but then also give them opportunities to share what they've learned in a more organic setting. And what's kind of cool is I find if you can turn those people who are against it into the teachers, that makes them super passionate. So just how passionate they were against some of these things, they'll be just as passionate for these things. So, but again, it's winning those hearts and minds.
Yeah, and I would say that we've seen that kind of grassroots plus that leadership accountability be necessary. But giving people the support, whether that is through time or coaching or, those forums to talk, there's a lot that's going on that's overwhelming. Like this change is happening so fast. I feel like we're behind, tomorrow, right? And it's, I think for a lot of those larger enterprises, they have these other change initiatives coupled with, oh, by the way, we're going to be an agentic-first organization, go. And we need to be thoughtful about how we provide that support and learning curve and, advance those folks that are kind of those early adopters to help pull the others along as well. Great question. All right, we're going to wrap with Weston. Just like AI exposes and amplifies weaknesses or bad patterns in code, it can expose or amplify weaknesses or bad patterns in the agile methodologies. What advice would you give to companies that find themselves in that boat? No mature agile process on the product side, but now moving at much faster speeds on the engineering side, thanks to agentic AI.
I think it's a great problem to have, right? Like the reason product has been so slow to make decisions is because it was so expensive to create the software. So if you as an organization can demonstrate, maybe they have 3 or 4 different ideas that they want to come with and build all 3 and do it before they normally would make a decision. And now it puts the ball, like gives them more information and knowledge on how to do that. Now we've got to think around, we're going to have user fatigue if we start throwing all of these things back at all of our users, but maybe we have the product managers, the product owners, the ones that are helping to make those decisions, and you give them options and they get to see it and play around with it and help them make the decision with evidence as opposed to, thinking through all of it, like, let's just build it and see what happens. And then they can start to discover different and new way of working, I think.
Yeah, and I think like if it's from a standpoint of like non-mature agile practices, like as in traditionally waterfall, well, I think hopefully you can expose some of those bottlenecks and like, hey, we took, I'll just say like a month for requirements and then we got it done in a few days or a week or something like that. Like that doesn't scale long term. So how do we keep the team fed? And is there a different way of doing that? And I think just having those conversations with those people and leaders and like, because ultimately, like I truly believe nobody goes to work every day trying to like be a bottleneck or do a bad job or anything like that. Like everybody's trying to do the best with what they know, just sometimes they don't know any better. So like how do we show them and bring them along for the ride and show them where they can fit in? So
Yep.
Yep. All right, we could talk about this all day. We really appreciate you guys again engaging with questions after the session. We're happy to answer any more for you. You found our contact information on that last slide. You'll know where to follow us or reach out. We'll send slides. And then again, a survey will prompt here if you guys are interested in getting that agent ready assessment done for your team or teams at your organization. And we'll see you all soon. Have a great day.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.